My name is Lauren. I'm 31 years old, and I'm a financial analyst living in Portland, Oregon. I'm what you'd call a data-minded numbers nerd. My greatest strength has always been my memory for details, a skill that turned out to be my salvation. The message from my mother, Carol, came through at 11:27 p.m. The screen flashed once, illuminating my dark apartment. I read the words. "We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. Let's see how brave you are now." I read it twice, then a third time, until each word etched itself into my brain like ice carving stone. I waited for the tears, for the panic. But what came instead was something cold, quiet, clarity. I didn't reply. I didn't cry. I smiled. They thought they were locking me out. They had no idea they'd just handed me the key. They didn't know that this text wasn't just a betrayal, it was the beginning of my legal strategy, and their end. If you have ever been used, drained, and discarded by the very people who should have protected you, then you already know this feeling. Hit that subscribe button, because this story isn't about revenge, it's about justice, delivered with paperwork and precision. We lived in a tidy, two-story colonial in Portland, Oregon. White shutters on the windows, a big maple tree out front that dropped red leaves all over the lawn every autumn. From the outside, we were the perfect family. Inside those walls, perfection was a performance. And I was the stagehand, the one working in the dark to make sure the show kept running. The exploitation. It started young. So young you can't even see the pattern. You just think it's chores. I was 14 when my father, Mark, stopped asking and started ordering. "Lauren, get the ladder. We're fixing the gutters." "Lauren, hold the flashlight. I'm working on the wiring." My weekends weren't spent at the mall or at sleepovers. They were spent breathing in sawdust and wiping sweat from my eyes. While other girls my age were figuring out makeup, I was figuring out how to sand a fence, how to re-caulk a window, how to climb onto the roof without slipping. My palms were always a patchwork of small cuts and blisters from handling tools that were too heavy for me. My back ached in a way a teenager's back shouldn't. But every time I tried to complain, every time I flinched, I got the same rehearsed response from my dad. He'd laugh, ruffle my hair, and say, "You're tougher than any son I could have asked for." And that praise. That small, poisoned crumb of praise. It worked. It made the exhaustion feel like an achievement. My mother, Carol, would just nod in approval. "Family helps family, Lauren," she'd say, her voice bright and final. "You're just so handy. Your sister Megan, well, she's delicate." Delicate. That was the family code word, the word that explained everything. Megan was the orchid, kept safe in the sunlight. I was the root system, hidden in the dirt, doing all the work to hold the flower up. Megan, my younger sister, was the golden child. While I was learning how to patch drywall, Megan was at ballet. While I was on the roof, she was at piano lessons. When Megan turned 16, a brand new car just appeared in the driveway, red bow and everything. When it was time for college, her tuition to a private art school was paid in full, no discussion. After that, she got an all-expenses-paid trip to Italy to study art. And me? I worked. I worked 12-hour days as a financial analyst. I sat at my desk, balancing spreadsheets for other people's futures, eating instant noodles just to save money. And the sickest part? I told myself it was fair. I'd bought into their story completely. I was the strong one. I was the responsible one. Being the dependable daughter, the one who could fix things, both the house and their finances, it made me feel important. I was proud to solve problems that I hadn't even created. I hadn't realized yet that my strength was just their excuse to use me. The manual labor was just phase 1. Phase 2 began when I turned 17 and started earning real money. The financial favors began just as subtly as the manual labor had. I'd just gotten a paycheck from my part-time job, feeling proud, feeling adult. My mother, Carol, found me in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a sigh. She didn't look at me, just stared out the window. "Things are tight this month, Lauren," she said, her voice weighted with exhaustion. "I don't know how we're going to cover the electric bill." She let the words hang in the air. The silence was an invitation, an expectation. I felt that familiar pull, the need to fix it, the pride in being the only one who could. I can help, Mom, I said, almost jumping at the chance. I got paid. Her relief was a physical thing, a wave that washed over me and made me feel warm. Oh, Lauren, you're a lifesaver, just this once. We'll pay you back as soon as things settle down. But this once never came. This once turned into a car repair the next month. Then it was unexpected expenses for the house. By the time I was in college, working full-time as an analyst while taking night classes, it had escalated. I was helping with the mortgage payments. I'd sit at my tiny desk in my tiny apartment, the glow of my laptop illuminating my face at 2 a.m., transferring hundreds, sometimes thousands, of dollars. I'd feel that little sting as my own account balance dwindled, but I'd push it down. I was the strong one. This is what the strong one does. The realization didn't hit me all at once. It was a slow, creeping dread that started when I was 21. I was trying to build my own savings. I wanted to move into a better apartment, maybe start saving for a down payment, but I was stuck. I was running in place. So, I did what I do best. I opened a spreadsheet. I started tracking the favors. I went back through my bank statements, and when I saw the numbers, the real numbers, I felt sick. I wasn't helping. I was their primary income stream. I was the invisible, unacknowledged line item in their budget. I was funding their entire lifestyle, their comfortable colonial house, their dinners out, their illusion of stability. And all that money they weren't spending? It was going into a savings account, an account for Megan. I was the invisible income stream, and she was the sole beneficiary. I started to push back, just a little. I'd mention wanting to take a vacation, or buy a new coat. The answer from my mother was always the same, a gentle, dismissive wave of her hand. Oh, Lauren, those things just aren't priorities right now. But they weren't priorities for me. How could they be, when Megan's trip to Italy was a priority? When her new car was a priority? When her future was the only priority? That's when the cracks started to show. I'd come home, and the whispers would stop. I'd walk into the living room, and both my parents would look up, startled, a conversation dying on their lips. The air would go still. "What's wrong?" I'd ask. "Nothing, dear," Carol would say, smiling too quickly. "Just talking about the house." I started paying closer attention. I'd hear them on the phone with financial planners, talking about future-proofing their assets. They'd talk about retirement. They'd talk about when we sell the house. They'd talk about setting things up for Megan. My name never came up, not once. It was this cold, gnawing feeling in my gut. My intuition was screaming at me. But I'm a numbers nerd. I need data. I need proof. I hated acting on a hunch. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I was being ungrateful. My gut knew something was terribly wrong, but I couldn't prove it. Not until that night in March. It was a Tuesday night in March. Tax season. I'd just pulled a 14-hour day. My eyes burned from staring at spreadsheets, and my shoulders felt like they were clamped in a vice. I let myself into the house, my shoes heavy, wanting nothing more than to fall into bed. The house was dark, but I heard voices from the kitchen, low, conspiratorial. I almost breezed past. I was too tired for family drama. But then, through the fog of exhaustion, I caught my name. Lauren. I froze in the hallway, one hand still on the doorknob. The cold from the outside air was still on my coat, but a different kind of chill, one from the inside, snaked up my spine. I held my breath and listened. It was my mother, Carol. Her voice was soft, but sharp, like a shard of glass. "The deed is in our names only," she said. "Mark and I are the sole owners. Lauren doesn't realize, all her help, all that money, it was voluntary. She won't get a thing when we sell." The words hit me. It wasn't a slap. It was a physical punch to the gut, knocking all the air out of my lungs. My hand gripped the wall, my knuckles going white. Voluntary, voluntary. Then, my father, Mark, chuckled. It was a deep, nasty sound. A sound that didn't belong to the man who'd taught me how to ride a bike. "She's never asked for paperwork," he said, and I could hear the smirk in his voice. Classic Lauren. All heart, no business sense. No business sense. My vision tunneled. The walls of the hallway felt like they were closing in. I had processed billions of dollars in financial data for my clients, but in my own home, I had no business sense. Then came Megan's voice. my delicate sister. But won't she expect something? She asked. Not, that's wrong. Not, we can't do that to her. Just, won't she be a problem? My mother snorted. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated contempt. Expect what? Carol said. She gave us that money. They were gifts. And gifts don't buy ownership. That was it. The click. The moment the entire, poisoned, 4-year-long performance snapped into focus. They weren't just careless. They weren't just taking me for granted. This was a long con, a deliberate, calculated plan to drain me of my labor and my money, all while secretly planning to cut me out and hand my future to my sister. They were scheming. Like common criminals, like mobsters dividing up stolen goods. I didn't storm in. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. The analyst in my brain, the numbers nerd they so casually dismissed, took over. The part of me that was all heart just died. It turned to ice. I let go of the wall. I turned, silent as a ghost, and walked to my room. I closed the door, the click echoing in the sudden silence. I sat at my desk. I opened my laptop. The glow of the screen lit up my face, and I felt nothing but a cold, terrible resolve. Gifts don't buy ownership. Okay, I whispered to the empty room. Let's see what documentation buys. I opened a new, encrypted folder, and I began to build the case that would end them. For the next 6 months, I lived 2 lives. By day, I was Lauren, the financial analyst. I went to work. I sat in meetings. I optimized portfolios and balanced multi-million-dollar accounts. I smiled at my colleagues, I drank my coffee, and I nodded along. But by night, I was a different person. I was a forensic accountant, and my own family was my target. I became a document hunter. My father's arrogance was my greatest ally. All heart, no business sense, he'd called me. That arrogance meant he was sloppy. He never kept clean books. He assumed I'd never look. He was wrong. I went back years. Bank statements, credit card bills, emails, old text messages I'd never deleted. Every time my father had needed a transfer, he'd send a quick, vague note. I found dozens of them. Need help with the mortgage this month. Just temporary. Need to cover this bill. Help. Just that, in all caps. They thought these were casual, throwaway requests. I cataloged them as evidence of solicitation. They weren't gifts if they were asked for as temporary help. I built the ledger. The numbers nerd they dismissed went to work. Every transfer, every date, every favor. $47 in direct mortgage contributions. $23,000 in renovation supplies. All paid from my accounts. New siding. A new water heater. The deck I restained. $15,000 in utilities. The electric bills, the water bills, the gas bills I'd covered during their tight months. I hit sum on the spreadsheet. The number glowed on my screen. $85,000. $85,000. And that was just the cash. How do you put a price on 14 years of unpaid labor? I did. I researched contractor rates in the Portland area. Painting the siding 3 times? That's $7,000. Replacing the shingles on the garage roof? $3,500. Fixing the drainage system in the backyard, which meant 2 weekends spent digging trenches in the mud. That's another $4,000. Fixing gutters, sanding fences, patching drywall. The list went on and on. I built spreadsheets so detailed, so cross-referenced, so ironclad, the IRS would have applauded. Each claim was backed by a receipt, a bank transfer, or a time-stamped email. My instincts had been right. This wasn't a family. This was a long-term, multi-level fraud operation. When my mountain of evidence was complete, I took a day off work. I met quietly with 3 separate attorneys. Not 1, 3. I'm an analyst. I required data validation. I laid out the files. I showed them the spreadsheets. I showed them the texts. Each lawyer, in their own way, said the same thing. They're right about one thing, the third lawyer said, leaning back in her chair. Your name isn't on the deed, but equity. Equity isn't just written in ink. She tapped the thick binder I'd prepared. It's written in bank records. It's written in text messages. It's written in proof of labor. You have a case, Lauren. A very strong one. I had a legal claim. So I paid the retainer. And I waited. I had the ammunition. I just needed them to fire the first shot. I didn't have to wait long. The shot was fired on a Monday night in September. The text that started this whole story. We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. Let's see how brave you are now. I've read it so many times I have it memorized, but the part that really mattered, the part that my lawyer absolutely loved, was the little ha-ha my mother added at the end. Ha-ha. It was so smug, so cruel. It was the final, critical piece of evidence. My lawyer had explained it to me. This text wasn't just a family argument. It was proof of malicious intent. It was proof they weren't just passively forgetting me. They were actively and gleefully trying to deprive me of my housing. They were trying to punish me. That text completed the picture. It was the why that tied all the whats together. They thought they were breaking me. Instead, they just handed me the final weapon I needed. I slept better that night, locked out, than I had in 10 years in that house. I didn't call them. I didn't text back. I just went to sleep. The next morning, I was at my desk at 7 a.m. sharp. The office was quiet, just the hum of the servers. I had my coffee black in one hand and my phone in the other. I watched the sunrise. It was beautiful, slicing through the blinds, casting long, sharp lines of light across my desk. I remember the smell of the coffee, the solid, cool weight of the phone in my palm, the sound of my own steady breathing. There was no anger, no fear. The time for that was over. All I felt was a cold, quiet adrenaline, the kind you get when you've run all the numbers, checked every formula, and you're finally about to execute the trade. I dialed my attorney. She picked up on the second ring. Lauren, good morning. I took a sip of coffee. Good morning, I said, my voice perfectly level. File the petition. There was a half-second of silence. Are you sure? She asked. Once we do this, there's no going back. I was sure 6 months ago, I said. They just gave us the final piece of evidence last night. It's time. Understood, she said, her voice all business. I'll have the process server at their door by noon. We hung up. I took another sip of coffee and turned to my first spreadsheet of the day. The fallout was immediate. 2 days later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was their attorney. I let it go to voicemail. He called again, immediately. And again. On the fourth try, I picked up, put him on speaker, and just listened. I didn't even say hello. Miss Lauren? He sounded flustered, like he'd been running. I'm the legal counsel for Mark and Carol. We have a serious problem here. This petition it's absurd. We need to discuss this immediately. I could hear the panic in his voice. I could picture it. My parents, red-faced and sputtering, waving the thick stack of documents in his face. The spreadsheets, the bank statements, the receipts. They'd been served. Their all heart, no business sense daughter had just dropped a legal bomb on their kitchen table. There's nothing to discuss, I said, my voice flat. Now, listen, he tried, shifting to his lawyer voice. This is a family matter. We can resolve this. Your parents are willing to be reasonable. Reasonable? I almost laughed. All future communication will go through my attorney. I've already forwarded you her contact information. Have a nice day. I hung up. I blocked his number. I blocked my parents' numbers. I blocked Megan's number. I set my first boundary, the first of many. Did they really think I would just walk away? Did they think the numbers nerd they'd dismissed for 2 decades wouldn't keep her own records? I didn't call back. I let them sweat. I let them sit in that sterile lawyer's office, flipping through every single page of my evidence, and realize, page by page, just how badly they had underestimated me. The mediation was set for the following week. The confrontation came the following week, not in our home, but in a sterile mediation conference room downtown. The room itself was designed to suck the emotion out of you. Beige walls, a long, polished table that reflected the buzzing fluorescent lights overhead. Everything about it felt harsh, cold, and unforgiving. It was perfect. My attorney and I sat on one side. We were there 10 minutes early. Then, they walked in. My father, Mark, entered first. His face was already a blotchy, furious red. He was practically vibrating with bluster. My mother, Carol, followed, trying to maintain her usual air of cool superiority, but her eyes were darting around, unable to land on me. And last came Megan. My delicate sister looked small, confused, and utterly terrified. For the first time in months, I was in the same room with all three of them. I waited for the surge of anger, or sadness, or that old, familiar ache of betrayal. I felt nothing. It was gone. All of it. The part of me that had craved their approval, the part that had broken that night in the hallway. It had been replaced. All I felt was a cold, professional focus. I was an analyst, and this was just the final, decisive meeting to review the numbers. I didn't make eye contact. I didn't say hello. I simply took the thick, manila folder from my briefcase and placed it in the center of the table. The sound it made, a soft thud, was the only sound in the room. "What's this?" Mark demanded, his voice trying to be a boom, but coming out strained. My attorney opened the folder with deliberate, almost theatrical precision. "Documentation," she said, her voice calm and clear, "of my client's financial contributions to the property in question, as well as evidence of labor and materials provided over a 14-year period." She began to slide copies across the table. Bank transfers totaling $47,000 toward mortgage payments, receipts for $23,000 in home improvements, $15,000 in utility payments, text messages soliciting these funds under the pretense of temporary hardship. Mark's red face started to go pale. Carol's hands were gripping each other in her lap so tightly her knuckles were white. "And finally," my attorney said, sliding over the last, most beautiful document, the subpoenaed bank statements from your accounts, showing that during these periods of financial hardship, you were, in fact, transferring significant funds into a high-yield savings account. The silence in that room was suffocating. This is ridiculous," Mark finally sputtered, slamming his hand on the table. "Those were gifts. Family helping family. She never asked for any kind of formal arrangement." My mother saw her opening. She leaned forward, her face collapsing into a mask of fake concern. "Lauren, honey," she whispered, "this is all just a terrible misunderstanding. You never meant for me to document everything," I said. My voice cut through her whisper like a knife. I spoke directly to her for the first time. "You never meant for me to understand property law. You never meant for me to find your other bank accounts." Mark stood up, his chair scraping loudly. "After everything we did for you, after raising you, housing you, feeding you, after using me as unpaid labor for 14 years? I cut him off, my voice just as cold, just as steady. "After taking $85,000 of my money under false pretenses? After planning to sell the house I helped build and maintain, and then texting me to laugh about making me homeless?" He sat back down. He had nothing. My attorney leaned forward. "My client is not seeking repayment of her contributions," she said, delivering the final blow. "She is seeking her rightful ownership stake in the property based on those contributions. Given the documented evidence of financial investment, labor, and malicious intent, we are requesting a 50% ownership interest." The room exploded. Mark started shouting about ungrateful children and legal extortion. My mother burst into tears, real ones this time, wailing about family loyalty and how I was destroying everything. Megan just sat there, a silent statue, probably calculating how much her inheritance had just been cut in half. I just sat there, calm, focused. I'd spent my entire life being the fixer. Now, I was just the analyst, presenting the data. And the data was undeniable. It didn't take 6 months. It took 6 weeks. The judge didn't even need a full hearing. The evidence in the mediation binder was so overwhelming, their lawyer advised them to settle. I stood outside the courthouse, holding the official, court-stamped documents. The paper felt heavy, substantial in my hand. It wasn't a text message. It wasn't a vague promise. It was a legal order granting me 50% legal ownership of the property. Justice, delivered with paperwork and precision. The first thing I did wasn't move back in. What was I going to do? Ask them for a copy of the new key? That place was poisoned. It wasn't a home. It was a crime scene, filled with 20 years of bad memories, manipulation, and exploitation. Besides, they had made it perfectly clear I wasn't welcome. So, as a 50% legal owner, I exercised my right. I forced the sale of the property. As my attorney explained, since we couldn't reach an agreement on the property's use, a massive understatement, liquidation was the only logical, legal option. Their retirement plan, their big nest egg, was built on the idea of selling that house and pocketing the entire amount. They were counting on it. The house sold for $680,000. It sold for that much, ironically, because of all the improvements I had funded and built over the years. The new roof, the fixed drainage, the updated kitchen. I had literally built my own nest egg. And theirs. My share came to $340,000. Their share also came to $340,000. After their own legal fees, and after realizing they now had to buy a new place to live in the inflated Portland market, their grand retirement dream evaporated. The comfortable, wealthy future they had stolen from me to give to Megan? It was gone. They walked away with just enough to buy a modest condo in a neighborhood far from the one they'd been so proud of. Karmic. Justice. With my share, I bought a beautiful townhouse in a quiet neighborhood across town. It's smaller than the family house, but it's 0% mine. Every tile, every window, every light fixture. My name is the only name on the deed. I sit in my new living room sometimes, in the peaceful, early morning silence, sipping coffee. I think about the locks they changed. I think about that text message. Let's see how brave you are now. And I smile. Because the locks they changed don't matter. I have my own locks now. My own keys. The house they tried to keep is sold, and half the money is in my bank account. And that message, that cruel, smug message meant to break me, it became the final, damning piece of evidence that proved my case. They still try to contact me, of course. The manipulation never really stops. It just changes tactics. My father, Mark, sends long, rambling emails full of guilt trips. After everything we sacrificed for you, this is how you repay us? My mother, Carol, leaves tearful, manipulative voicemails. The family is supposed to forgive, Lauren. You're going to regret this when we're gone. And Megan, my delicate sister, the one who sat at that kitchen table and listened to them plot my financial ruin, she's tried to play mediator. She claims she never really knew how bad it was. But she knew. She sat there. She was complicit. I don't respond to any of them. I've blocked their numbers. I've filtered their emails to go straight to a folder I never read. I've moved on with my life. The people who hurt you the most are often the ones who think they know you best. They assume you'll always be the person they conditioned you to be. Compliant, giving, easy to dismiss. They never ever count on the day you stop being that person. They never count on the day you pick up a binder, walk into a lawyer's office, and fight back with the one thing they can't manipulate, the cold, hard truth. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to be the strong one until it nearly broke you, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories about standing up to toxic family members and reclaiming your power. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to take legal or financial action against a family who tried to use you? What was your breaking point? Your stories help others realize they're not alone. And they're not.